This is MrSavage, Europe's smartest Fortnite player
Fortnite! Yes, Mr. Savage! Oh, no,
and best player. But recently he ditched Europe and moved to North America, which absolutely no one expected. So to find out how he got here, we have to go all the way back to the start of MrSavage's story, which would begin all the way over in Norway on November 12th of 2004, when Martin Foss Anderson, who we all now know as MrSavage, was born. Now, as a child, Martin would play all sorts of sports with his brother, which made him quite competitive, and this same competitive spirit is what would allow him to succeed later in his career. Now, you may be wondering how his gaming career really started. Well, it would come from his brother, because in late 2018, his brother would recommend him a new game called Fortnite. Now, Fortnite was a new game built off the brand new game model called Battle Royales, which just so happened to be gaining massive popularity during this time, especially with Fortnite. Anyways, as MrSavage played more and more with his friends in the early days of Fortnite, he would quickly realize he was leagues ahead of everyone. So he would begin to post videos of his gameplay on his YouTube channel, with his first video being posted on March 22nd of 2018. And I was curious, who was MrSavage's very first supporter? So I found his earliest comment from his first video over 6 years ago, and through just a bit of further research, I realized that this YouTube account that commented first belonged to Savage's older brother, Michael, who seemed to be quite good at soccer. Now, as Michael was grinding soccer, he recommended to Savage that he should start streaming his gameplay live on Twitch. And Savage would listen, because in May, only 2 months after this first video, he would begin streaming live on Twitch, but he would only really be averaging around 9 viewers in his first month. Now, this seemed like quite the slow start, but in reality, something much more important to his future was happening behind the scenes that no one knew about. And that was the fact that he was becoming quite good friends with Mongraal. Now, he met Mongraal through another friend named Wixie that Savage actually met in a solo game, and from there, Wixie introduced MrSavage into the pro competitive Fortnite scene. Now, at this current point in time, when Mongraal and MrSavage had met, Mongraal and his old duo had just temporarily split ways, and it made perfect sense for Savage to step in and team up with Mongraal. Anyways, it was right around this time that Mongraal was rapidly rising into fame, and many people were starting to see MrSavage playing with Mongraal, wondering exactly who he was. And this curiosity was fueled even more when a YouTube clip channel began to make videos about him, building the hype behind MrSavage's name. And because of all this, MrSavage would begin to get quite a few views on his videos, with most of his videos from this time having roughly 100,000 views each. Now, it was also during this same time that his streams would begin to pop off, because in November he would average almost 900 viewers, while also gaining more than 50,000 followers on Twitch. Now, although he was seeing so much success, many of you may be questioning how exactly MrSavage was able to do all this, because he was only 14 at the time. And well, it turns out that MrSavage and his family were switching schools, and during the 6-month period of finding a new school, Savage was homeschooled, and this obviously allowed for him to see all this crazy success, since he had so much free time. Now, his parents knew he was playing a game called Fortnite, but they never really knew quite how good he was at Fortnite until one day, Savage told his father that he just placed second in a tournament called Winter Royale. And at first, his father was quite impressed, but he didn't realize just how crazy this was. And a few hours later, after some research on his father's end, he realized that Fortnite was played by millions of players, and that his son was amongst the best. So this was really where MrSavage's parents started supporting him in his online journey. Now, funny enough, the legal age to compete for money on Fortnite during this time was 16, and of course, MrSavage was only 14. So this meant Savage could still compete in tournaments without prizing, but as soon as money was involved in the tournament, Savage was kicked out. So regardless of this, he was still seeing his first online earnings from his social medias, which was fantastic for him. And it seemed like things really couldn't be going much better for him. But as MrSavage began to play wagers and scrims with friends of his, he would end up averaging more than 3,500 viewers in January of 2019. Now, this crazy level of popularity live streaming, along with his massive presence on YouTube, made him an absolute no-brainer pickup for NRG Esports, one of the biggest gaming organizations of all time. So now that MrSavage was a part of such a prestigious team, he had to hold up the name, and in the next few months he would do just that, continuing to grow on all of his social medias, practically doubling his live viewership from January to March, reaching over 6,600 live viewers. But more importantly than all that was the introduction of online open tournaments in Fortnite. And it would be in these exact tournaments that MrSavage would prove to the world that he was one of the best Fortnite players to ever do it. Now, in only his second online Fortnite tournament ever, he would place 5th, but he wouldn't do it alone, because he duoed up with another player that went by the name of Benji Fishy, who is definitely one of Fortnite's most loved players of all time, on top of also being really good. Anyways, MrSavage and Benji Fishy had met just like Mongraal, through all the online competitive servers that were available to practice Fortnite in. And from there, these two would begin to practice more and more, and on top of them both building up their own brands on social media, they would obviously show up big time in tournaments with their 5th place, which they quickly followed up with yet another great placement, this time being 4th place. Now, they just had some great improvements, slowly climbing the leaderboards from 5th to 4th place, but little did they know these placements would quickly become an everyday thing for them later in their careers. And this rapid progression for MrSavage would quickly ramp up, because in his next tournament he would place 2nd, and then only a few weeks later MrSavage would win his first public online Fortnite tournament. Now, at this point, he was easily considered one of the biggest faces of Fortnite, especially on the competitive side of things, and the fact that he was so popular was great for him, because just 9 days after his tournament victory, one of the most important events in gaming history would be announced. And this was the Fortnite World Cup that was open to everyone to compete in, with a prize pool of $40 million. Now, just this massive prize pool turned heads, but on top of that was the fact that this was an in-person LAN event, which would be absolutely perfect for MrSavage to show just how good he really was. Now, Savage would duo up with Benji Fishy for the duo portion of the tournament, and they would hit the ground running because in warm-ups of the World Cup, they would shatter the competition, winning the warm-ups. And of course, this massive win 100% made them a favorite heading into the actual World Cup qualifiers. So with tons of pressure to perform, with tens of thousands of people watching them live, they would manage to clutch up the victory in the second week of World Cup duo qualifiers, sending both MrSavage and Benji Fishy to New York with $100,000. So yeah, MrSavage was really good, being one of the first players to qualify to the World Cup, but he still had the chance to qualify as a solo. So MrSavage would once again start practicing and honing in on the details, and it would pay off almost immediately, with MrSavage placing 4th in week 5 of solos, netting him yet another $50,000 and the chance to compete in both duos and solos in New York. Now, only a very small amount of players actually qualified to the World Cup, and while that may be obvious, MrSavage was a part of an even smaller and more exclusive group of players that managed to qualify to both solos and duos. So anyways, MrSavage would put in hundreds of hours of practice along with every other player, but MrSavage had the added pressure of a massive following expecting him to win it all. So when it came time for the World Cup, MrSavage would drop right out from the battle bus and ultimately ended up getting 14th in duos and 29th in solos, which was by all means an amazing pair of placements, but for MrSavage it just wasn't good enough, because he was such a heavy favorite to win everything. So even though the World Cup went well for him, it still had a major mental toll on him, causing him to only stream roughly 50 hours per month in the next few months following the World Cup, which was in stark contrast to the usual 150 hours per month MrSavage would stream before the World Cup. But this decrease in streaming turned into even more focus on competitive Fortnite for MrSavage, because he would team up with players by the name of Rojo and Item for the upcoming FNCS, and they would try their absolute best, but they would fall short in finals, only placing 7th. Now, at this point in Europe, there were 3 big content creators, Mongraal, Benjyfishy, and MrSavage. And some of you may know just how good Mongraal and Benjyfishy were doing during Season X of Fortnite, winning almost every single tournament, making hundreds of thousands of dollars. And because of this, they largely took over the massive viewers during this time, resulting in MrSavage dropping all the way down to only 3,000 average viewers from just a few months prior. And on top of all this, Fortnite Chapter 2 would release on October 19th of 2019, which was a great opportunity for streamers to see growth. But despite this, MrSavage continued on his decline, down to 3,000 average viewers. And in this time, he would win a couple of solo cups here and there, also placing 7th in Squad FNCS, which of course was not a placement he was overly proud of. And because of this increasing inconsistency, he was largely called washed and bad at the game. So he would begin to stream even less and focus on competitive Fortnite even more. So now heading into 2020, MrSavage's career seemed like it had two possible routes. One was to slowly fall off into irrelevance, but the other path was to rise again to the top, and MrSavage was given the perfect opportunity to prove everyone saying he was washed, because Fortnite would announce DreamHack Anaheim, a solo tournament where all the world's best players would travel to Anaheim to compete for their share of $250,000. But just as it looked like MrSavage had a chance in this tournament, he would be dropped from NRG and picked up by 100 Thieves. So now MrSavage had to prove his old org wrong too, and MrSavage knew that this was his chance, so he would grind harder than he ever had, putting in tons of hours of practice. And just a few days before the DreamHack event, Season 2 of Chapter 2 would release, with tons of map changes and new loot, which meant MrSavage needed to put in even more hours before the tournament so he would be familiar with the new update. And he did just that. And then finally the day of the tournament came around and MrSavage was more than ready, which showed in his games as he was at the top of the leaderboard. But everything would come down to the last game in one single moment to decide if all the work would pay off for MrSavage.
Can Savage win it? The old duo, bit of rivalry, best mates, and oh my god, Savage takes down Benji. Can he clutch up the win? Oh my god, it's coming right down to the wire. Deny is still alive. It's a 1v1 Savage versus Denied. He's got the rocket. He follows up with a pump shot, 50 tag.
It's a 1v1. Savage, the next everything comes through. Pump shot misses. It's another chance. Goes for the line. Go back to the goal.
This massive win at DreamHack did multiple things for MrSavage, showing he definitely wasn't washed, totally reviving his relevance in the Fortnite competitive scene, helping him to average 6,000 viewers again, and also netting him $30,000 from the tournament win. So now, after such a great win, the question was, could he build on this moment and start gaining some momentum? And the short answer to this question was yes, because over the next 5 months, he would increase his average viewers all the way up to 14,000 in June, which so far was his peak. And he did this by frequently streaming himself, playing the daily duos cups with buddies like Andretta and iDrop, also placing 12th in FNCS Grand Finals. And then in May, MrSavage would finally reunite with Benjyfishy for the upcoming Trio FNCS, also picking up Lechi, a big German streamer and controller player. And at this point, Benjyfishy was at the peak of his popularity in Fortnite, so it was a no-brainer that MrSavage's numbers would go up also as a result of playing with him. And this was truly the time period in which it seemed like MrSavage was fully honing in on competitive Fortnite, because him and his trio would absolutely be grinding almost every daily duo cup and placing fairly well in lots of tournaments. And on top of that, Season 4, otherwise known as Stark Season, was great for content, and MrSavage would take advantage of that too, setting up an entire team to manage his YouTube, which helped him to pump out tons of videos, with many of them during this time gaining millions of views. And sadly, his YouTube views would be the best thing to come since his win at DreamHack, because in Grand Finals this season, he would only place 8th, which was a major letdown for the amount of hype his team had. So heading into the next season, MrSavage would decide to team up with iDrop and possibly the best player to ever play Fortnite, Tayson. Now, everyone liked MrSavage's chances of winning, simply because he was playing with Tayson, but everyone hopes once again would be let down because MrSavage would place 8th again. Now, these were by no means bad placements, but for a player like Savage, all he was really looking for was a win. So with that FNCS win in mind, he would head into the Primal season, teaming up with Andretta and Refsguard, and MrSavage would put on the best FNCS performance of his life.
Got your left somewhere, Logan.
Oh, nice game, boys. Good. That's a good game.
Yeah. I'm doing a knee off. I don't know if you have time. No, you don't have time to do it, I think. Get together, just stick them in there.
That's one finish, stop. Play it up, I think. He's out for the win. He has no use. Yes.
Let's go! You guys are so good! No! I'm getting up.
No much space for coming in right now.
So unfortunately, he would only place 2nd, barely missing out on the FNCS win. But of course, the 2nd place was still great, and it seemed like MrSavage might have been back and found his stride, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Because over the next few seasons, MrSavage would fail to see any more competitive success on par with his 2nd place, and he would go on to place 11th, 23rd, and 15th, which wrapped up his Chapter 2 in quite the poor way. And once again, it seemed like his career, at least in competitive Fortnite, was at a split road, and on top of this, Chapter 3 had just released, so MrSavage could either come back better than ever, or just continue to flop in tournaments. And you may be expecting me to say that he began to win every single tournament, but unfortunately it didn't quite go that way. You see, when Chapter 3 released, MrSavage announced that he would once again team up with his longtime duo partner, Benji Fishy, and this definitely excited lots of viewers and fans, and it also gave them high expectations. But unfortunately, nothing really notable would happen, because in the first 2 seasons of Chapter 3, they would only place 36th and 45th. And there really isn't much to say about this besides the fact that it was quite disappointing. But I don't think anyone expected what would happen next because everything seems so normal. But that would all change when Benji Fishy, one of Fortnite's most loved players and best players, would announce that he was officially and permanently quitting Fortnite to pursue competitive Valorant.
I am officially quitting competitive Fortnite to pursue Valorant. Recently, I've fell out of love with Fortnite. I used to be able to play Fortnite like 8-10 hours a day, but even last season I was only playing during the tournaments just because I really couldn't force myself to get on the game.
Now, this was a massive blow to everyone who played Fortnite, but it was an especially big blow to MrSavage because Benji Fishy was one of Savage's longtime friends and his duo partner. And because Benji had quit, this of course meant MrSavage had to find a new duo partner for the next season, and he decided to pair up with Hen, who was just coming off an FNCS win, but unfortunately for both of them, this duo really wouldn't work out too well, because they would end up finishing 26th place in FNCS Grand Finals. And again, in the next season, MrSavage would switch up his duo partner, playing with iDrop this time. And yet again, you guessed it, they would flop, only placing 32nd in Grand Finals. So it was safe to say that Chapter 3 wasn't really going too well for MrSavage, but this dry streak would somewhat come to an end for him in the next FNCS because he would team up with one of Europe's best fighters, Vadil, and together the two would manage to place 8th, which was quite a good placement, and it was a big step in the right direction towards qualifying to the global LAN event in Copenhagen at the end of the chapter. So again, with a bit of momentum behind them, they would head into the next FNCS with high hopes of qualifying. But they would totally flop, placing 43rd, which was one of MrSavage's worst placements ever. Now, at this point, things weren't looking too good for them, but they still had a small chance to qualify, because there was a last chance major that allowed for just a few more teams to qualify. So with this one last chance, they would totally lock in and throw everything they had at this one opportunity.
Glöm det ska dö.
And in a great performance, they managed to win the event, punching them straight through the qualification right into Copenhagen, where they unfortunately only managed to place 36th, bringing home $14,000. Now, while they might not have done the best at Copenhagen, this still made MrSavage one of the only people in the world to have played in both the World Cup solos and duos, along with playing in the Copenhagen LAN event. Now, I can't forget to mention that during this entire time, MrSavage had been averaging roughly 7,000 live viewers on Twitch, along with the fact that his YouTube channel had continued to pump out hundreds of videos, with all of them pulling in hundreds of thousands of views, despite how his competitive career was going throughout this time. And it was around this point where it seemed like MrSavage was transitioning over into content, or at least favoring it over competitive Fortnite. And this was because when Chapter 5 was released, MrSavage announced that he would be playing with Mongraal, one of Fortnite's biggest names. And for those of you who may not know or remember, Mongraal hadn't been competing in Fortnite for over a year at this point, so him coming back and playing with MrSavage was huge. But of course, this was a massive risk for MrSavage to take, because he was playing with someone that was so out of touch with competitive Fortnite at this point. Anyways, they made it work, and Mongraal got back into competitive shape, and the two went on to miraculously qualify all the way into Grand Finals, where they unfortunately wouldn't do the best, only placing 39th. But this was still a crazy performance and a crazy season for the both of them, because of the circumstances they were working against. And on top of this, they streamed all of FNCS live on Twitch, with MrSavage pulling in over 127,000 live viewers, which is his all-time peak on Twitch. So this of course showed both Mongraal and MrSavage that they were doing something right. So they would stick together heading into the next season. But the next season was honestly kind of a letdown, just not really being very enjoyable for any competitive players, including Mongraal and MrSavage, so they wouldn't really take it too seriously, which didn't look too good in their placements because they would actually miss out on qualifying to Grand Finals, but they knew that this wasn't a big deal because in the background, they were secretly plotting possibly the biggest event in their career, which they would announce on June 2nd, and many of you probably know exactly what this was. But anyways, they announced that they would be moving from Europe to America to compete on American servers, and create content with all of America's biggest creators. Now really quickly, I'll dive into exactly why this move was so smart, and it basically has a lot to do with the fact that after being the biggest creators in Europe for years, they pretty much had appealed to the entire European audience, which was stunting their growth in streaming and on YouTube. So in moving over to NA, they would still be able to hold onto their loyal European audience while putting themselves out there for a whole new American audience that might not have watched them as much before they moved. So in simple terms, this move allowed them to appeal to a larger audience and collaborate with streamers they've never collaborated with in the past, again, helping them meet a wider audience. And since being in America, MrSavage has had tons of streams and has been on other people's streams too, such as Bucky's, where he plays soccer and basketball with all the agent boys. And streams like this are exactly what I personally think we will see a lot more of. But besides the IRL streams, MrSavage and Mongraal have begun to play FNCS on any central servers from Dallas, where they have 0 ping. And so far, things seem to be going alright because they've managed to place decently well in both weeks of qualifiers, landing themselves just short of upper brackets, but of course, they're still in lower brackets. Now, it's hard to say just how good they'll do in semifinals, but I do have a feeling that with some good practice, they could easily make grands. Because after all, they are MrSavage and Mongraal. Anyways, at this point in current day, MrSavage has earned over $500,000 and is qualified to many FNCS Grand Finals, along with plenty of other tournament wins. And MrSavage has also managed to build up quite the social media empire, with over 4 million Twitch followers, over 3 million YouTube subscribers, and plenty of other fans on other platforms. And regardless of all of his ups and downs, one thing's for sure, and that's that he will go down in Fortnite history. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe because lots of time went into it.